Hello, horror fans. Welcome back to Jay vs. Horror. I'm your host, Jay Wall. And today, guys, I'm going to be telling you my horror story. This is my evolution as a horror fan, how I got started, what turned me on to the genre. I'm also going to be reading off some of your comments. We posted this on social media asking people about their favorite movie moments and what was the first horror film that they actually remember seeing. So I'm going to tell a few stories here, and then we're going to read those comments off. And I would love for you guys to leave your stories here in the comments section, and we'll get to another episode of this at some point. We'll read those comments off. Now, for me, the first thing that I can honestly remember having to do with horror was when I was real little. I was sick, and my mom took care of me almost all the time. She was a med student, and my dad was in the Navy. She would drag me around everywhere she went just because she felt like she took better care of me than anybody else would. And so she would take. She also didn't want me to feel like an invalid, so she would take me to stuff, and we would go to parties where all the kids would get together and play, and the adults would watch videos. It was that era where people got together and watched shocking movies and whatever videotape was going around at the time. So I remember I went to one of these with her, and for some reason there were no other kids there that day, and so I ended up sitting on her lap in somebody's living room. I'm probably 3 or 4 years old, and she had her hands over my eyes while they watched this movie, and I just picked up bits and pieces of the movie as it was going along, and what I could see through her fingers that were separated when I was courageous enough to even look. But what really got me was the people there in the audience that were viewing it. The oohs and the ahs coming from these adults, and what could possibly be on that movie. What could they be looking at right now? And that's what got me going. That was the first time I remember being excited about horror movies. And, you know, the interesting part was I didn't know what that movie was for years. For like 30 years, I didn't know what that movie was. It just, nothing fit. I searched for it, all the time. And I never could find a film that exactly fit, right? And then a few years ago, I was watching Burial Ground from 1981, and something just clicked with me. I'd seen the movie before even, but something just clicked with me that time that was the movie. Just certain things, flashes in my mind, uh, just certain imagery and, a word here or there, but it fit perfectly. And so even though for 30 years I didn't know what that movie was, that is the movie that set me out on the journey of watching several thousand other films and loving every second of that. So, very appreciative of my mother for that. She was probably freaked out that day. She probably didn't know exactly what to do and didn't want to leave. So, the next thing I can kind of remember is I mentioned being sick when I was a kid. Well, I had a liver transplant, and this was back before they used lasers and stuff for surgery. So, yeah, my stomach is real tore up. It looks like a set of railroad tracks that don't make any sense. And so at first they said I wasn't going to be able to go to a normal school, but my mom fought them on that. She got me enrolled in public school, and I remember a couple of the kids were making fun of me one day, and it was because we lived in the Midwest, to right near the South, right in the South, and there were a lot of Christian conservatives and parents like that who had basically told their kids that I was an abomination and that they needed to make fun of me at school. And so they were calling me Frankenstein, and dumb kids, they don't even know what they're saying. What they mean is Frankenstein's monster, and they were told by some dumb hillbilly to say that anyway. They don't really know what they're saying. So, I went home and I asked my mom, or actually my grandmother was there that day, I remember, and I asked her about it, and she she was a huge fan of all the Universal films, all the Hammer films, Dark Shadows, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, all that stuff, Sherlock Holmes. She went and got her copy of Boris Karloff and Frankenstein, and we watched it together. And yeah, my feelings were a little bit hurt, but I also saw that he was kind of an anti-hero to a certain extent, and that, what was wrong with him wasn't his fault. And I also saw that somebody could come back from the dead by being given parts from someone else, and they were stronger than the normal people then, just like I was. So even though this was the early 1980s, I feel like my education in horror films started off right because after seeing Frankenstein with my grandmother, I just tore through all those old Universal films and then moved on to stuff like, the Abbott and Costello meets Wolfman films, Ghost and Mr. Chicken, anything I could get my hands on that had anything to do with horror that my parents would let me watch, right? So, my next really clear memory is I was at my uncle's house, and it was like a kind of a quasi party family dinner type thing, and they were watching a video, right? And so they made all the kids go in the other room, which was our first sign that something was going down. They must be watching something crazy. They're making us go in the other room. And they were watching Psycho 2. Now, being a kid, having no idea what Psycho was, I had a couple older cousins there, and they were probably, 10, 11, 12 years old, something like that. And they started trying to explain Psycho to us sitting at this table, and they did a pretty terrible job of explaining what Psycho was. I actually believed it was like that Anthony Perkins was some kind of a monster like Michael Myers, and he went around dressed as a woman killing people, which is kind of what it's about, but not really, right? Uh, so what we decided to do was we took turns. We decided to be sly, and one of us would go into the living room where they're watching this movie and be like, "Hey, I need a drink of water," or, just love on your mom for a minute until she tells you to go away. And so through that, each one of us, there's like six of us, we go in there, we take our little turn doing our thing, and while we're doing that, we're just collecting as much information as we possibly can, watching every possible second that we can of this movie. And so the six of us are sitting around this table piecing Psycho 2 together. And it's kind of like when you play that game with the tin can, phone call or telephone or whatever they call it. Yeah, it doesn't get back. It doesn't make perfect sense when everything is said and done, right? So that's how that went. But I just really remember being super excited by it, and the other kids were super excited by it. And it was something that we weren't supposed to be watching. And so later on in life, when I watched Psycho 2, I was a little, at first, underwhelmed because I was like, oh, I thought this was so gory when I was a kid. But I also, gained a new appreciation for it because it's really a damn good sequel. Not many good sequels out there to great films, and Psycho 2 is a damn good sequel. So then the next thing that I remember, my dad collected movies. I mean, that's probably where I got a lot of it from too. He loved movies. We had hundreds, or if not thousands, of movies, and he taped movies all the time. And so he goes to the sale barn, which is like a flea market, right? And he buys this guy selling crates of VHSs, and my dad buys a crate of them for like $10. It's like 20 movies in there or something. And he brings it home, and we're digging through the movies, like, wow, we hit the jackpot. And I find one that says Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, right? So I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. I'll watch that one again later. I love that movie. So I put it to the side, and maybe a day or two goes by, and I reach for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And now when I opened it, or slid it out, from the box, it was Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. I almost shit my pants right then and there. I had never seen a Freddy movie. My parents wouldn't let me see Freddy movies. I knew about them, but I didn't know, I'd never seen one. So as much as you can know about it through it being like a pop culture thing, right? And I'm still pretty young. I mean, I was probably at this point maybe 6 or 7, and so I knew immediately what to do. Right, it was in the middle of the afternoon. My dad was going to be coming home from work. I slid it back into the case, right, and put it up, and then I would come. My parents when I was little, they had strict bedtimes, but the older that we got, they kind of came off of that. And my mom worked. She was a lab tech. She started out, as a phlebotomist, a lab tech, and then she became a nurse, and now she's a doctor. She worked and went to school, on and on and on. But so she was never home much, and when she was usually in bed asleep. And so I would sneak up and watch whatever I wanted to. And yeah, I went there and put Freddy Krueger in the VHS top loader, and yeah, it was a very significant moment in my life. Later on, like I would hear people talk about how bad Part Two was, and how it was latently homosexual and stuff like that. I'm like, I never got that when I was a kid because it just scared the shit out of me. All right, that's. But yeah, you get over that pretty quick. Your initial injection of Freddy and Jason and Michael Myers, I went through all those pretty quick within the next 2 or 3 years. So I'm like 10, 11 years old, and I'm staying at my aunt's house. This is my next little story here. And this is where I found out there was more to horror than what I initially thought, right? So, staying with my aunt, and we rented Hellraiser 3, and we're watching it, and my cousin was getting scared, and I'm like, this is so ridiculous. How can you get scared? Like, I mean, these movies are, I've seen every horror movie, nothing scares me, all, going on and on. And my aunt says, have you ever seen The Exorcist? She's like, you sounds like you've seen a lot of like slasher movies and stuff. Have you ever seen The Exorcist? And I'm like, no, but I've heard of it, and it can't be that scary, and this and that, going on. And so she has a copy of it. She goes and gets it, and they put it in, and I held it together pretty good that night. I didn't let it get to me that much that night because everybody was around. But the next day, this was in Horn Lake, Mississippi, and they were all headed to the casino to spend the weekend, right? And I was house sitting, or house sitting to the extent of till my cousins got home that day, right? I was just staying there by myself until they got home, and so I'm sitting there, and they leave, and I've got like 3 hours until my older cousin gets home, and I'm freaking out, right? Like I'm on a sectional, backed up into the corner with both doors open in the front room so I could see out both sides of the house so nothing can get me or get behind me. Or and every time I close my eyes, I just see that girl's face. And I'm not a religious person now, but I was back then. And up until this point, all the horror movies I had seen, I were like, yeah, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. Great effects. I loved all that stuff. I understood that it was just effects. It wasn't real or anything like that. And so when I saw The Exorcist, I was like, oh, shit. There are really things to be scared of out there. One of them would be a demon or even just the devil coming and just taking your ass over, just possessing you. And there's a little bit of unease, too, because you're like, I always thought you had to mess with the devil for the devil to mess with you. And then you realize you're like, not necessarily. He kind of likes people who don't really, who aren't really on his side. That's kind of a show of force for him, right? To take somebody who's a Christian or somebody who doesn't believe in anything even. But yeah, so that's basically a few stories from my horror film background. That's what got me started. And we'll talk some more about some of the other great horror movie moments I've had. I've had a bunch, man. I've seen a ton of movies. Like when I was a kid, about from the time I was, 12 to 20 or something like that, we had a theater that was one of the old time theaters, had the big marquee, had the stadium seating, and the movies there were $1.50. And so I saw every possible horror film I could see during that period of time. During the 90s that was released, and then at home trying to watch as many as I can. Kids today don't understand how good they've got it, right? Because back then you watched what was theatrically released and what you could get on HBO or what you could get on Showtime, and what few cable movie stations you could get. Or a lot of people just had antenna TV. We had antenna TV for a long time where that's all we had. And you would have to count on whatever your local station was showing if you were going to get any horror at all, right? Maybe some Tales from the Dark Side reruns or Tales from the Crypt reruns, or, a lot of stations had Saturday night double features. That wasn't always the case, but a lot of them did. And so the kids today, they've got a jump start. They can just go look up a movie. They can just go search a movie. And if they've got $3.99, they can go watch it for on their phone, in their bedroom, wherever they want, It's great. It's great, but it's also like they don't think these kids understand how hard it was being a horror fan back when it wasn't such a massively popular thing, for one, and two, you didn't have access to everything, right? You just had what you could get your hands on physically around you, you know. So yeah, we'll be talking about some of the other great horror movie moments I've had over the years, things that really flicked switches in my head and set me down different paths. And so now I'm gonna read a few comments that people left on my page. I have a bunch, guys. We posted it in my group on Facebook. If you're interested in Facebook horror groups, go check it out. Jay versus Horror on Facebook. We got about 26,000 members there, and we got a pretty good response there. Lots of answers, and I'm gonna disseminate those as we go. Like, we'll do a couple more episodes, we'll do a couple more comments, and so tonight I'm just gonna do the ones that are on my main page, and we will do the ones from Jay versus Horror during the next episode and the one after that. I'm planning like 3 or 4 of these episodes, right? So Marty Fleming says, Blackula. My older cousin let me and my sister stay up to watch it when she was babysitting for us. We were definitely too young to see it, and neither of us slept well for days. That had to be a great first horror film, Blackula. Tony Kanopka, great friend of the show here, says, I believe my first was Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things when I was like 4. But the one I remember better because it was like an event was the original Friday the 13th when I was 7. My best friend's entire family came over, and 9 of us surrounded the TV eating popcorn and had a blast. That sounds awesome. Nathan Bartlebaugh from the Phantom Galaxy podcast. Nathan says, King Kong. I'm pretty sure. That was very young. First one that traumatized me. Walking in as my family was watching that scene inside the dog pen in The Thing. Oops. Yeah, that would maybe be traumatic if we were very young. Jahoni Foyadeli, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, buddy, just says Jaws. And George Rogers says Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Master. My sister, The Dream Child would be Part 5, right? My sister took me to see it when I was 4 years old. Good job, sis. And Andy Usuri says Alien was his first horror film. Great horror movie moment, memory. Guys, that's all we've got for today. Like I said, we're going to split it up. We're going to do maybe 3 more episodes, and we'll put your comments out as we go. We will talk to you the next time we've got something worth talking about. Bye.